Number 5 on this list is war. So this one's pretty general, but the Bible definitely touched on it quite a bit, so it feels fair to include it. Now, war arose in heaven, Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon. And the dragon and his angels fought back, but he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. And I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, "Now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come, for the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God. And they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they loved not their lives even until death." Whew! What a mouthful, guys, but that is just one passage discussing war, but frankly, there are just so many of them. Sometimes they talk about specific wars being fought between certain groups, but a lot of the time it's just war in general. Sometimes it even discusses how God will be with you when you go to war, which is actually kind of an incentive to fight. This book and what it preaches has been the catalyst for so many battles in human history, and it's not unreasonable to think that it's going to happen again. I certainly hope that there is no more major wars in human history and this predict isn't right, but I'm not going to be holding my breath. Number 4 on this list is the 7 bowls. Then I heard a loud voice from the temple telling the 7 angels, "Go and pour out onto earth the 7 bowls of the wrath of God." So the first angel went and poured out his bowl on the earth, and harmful and painful sores came upon the people who bore the mark of the beast and worshipped its image. The second angel poured out his bowl into the sea, and it became like the blood of a corpse, and every living thing died that was in the sea. The third angel poured out his bowl into the rivers and the springs of water, and they became blood. And I heard the angel in charge of the waters say, "Just are you, O Holy One, who is and who was, for you brought these judgments." That's a passage from the Bible, and those are only 3 of the bowls. There are literally 4 more of these things that get even worse. The 4th one causes the sun to burn people. The 5th one covers the world in darkness and has people bite their tongues off. The 6th one dries up a massive river, and the 7th one causes huge earthquakes. So not really the best of times if you ask me. Now let's be real, folks. Are all of these things gonna happen all at once? Probably not. But some of it definitely could. Is there a reality where I see all of the fish in the oceans getting poisoned by something and then ultimately destroying the worldwide ecosystem? Potentially. Could I see a massive earthquake ravaging parts of the world and causing a horrible chain reaction killing millions? Yeah, I mean, it could happen. All of these bowls are pretty horrible, and we just have to hope that none of these things happen to us now, because the ramifications, they'd be pretty catastrophic. Number 3 on this list is the persecution of Christians. Religion, although it can do great good, has also caused horrible evil. Throughout history, we can see that religion is basically the leading cause for humans to start fighting each other. What someone believes and the rules to which they govern their life is really important to us humans, and Christianity is no different. The Bible has talked a bunch about the persecution of Christians before. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed, always carrying in the body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may be manifested in our bodies. For we who live are always being given over to death for Jesus' sake, so that the life of Jesus also may be manifested in our mortal flesh. So death is at work in us, but life in you. That's just one of the passages in the Bible talking about it, but we also have some other ones that are just straight to the point, reading, "Indeed, all who desire to live a godly life in Christ Jesus will be persecuted." Now, Christians being persecuted is nothing new. This is a prediction that's actually already come to fruition many times over. Like I said before, religion has started many wars in the past, and the persecution of Christians has certainly been a reason for a couple of them. It's possible that this isn't actually done though. I'd like to believe that the world is getting to a place where one can believe what they choose to believe, and that's fine for them, but the fact of the matter is we just simply aren't there yet. There has always been and continues to be the persecution of not just Christians, but tons of groups groups with all different beliefs. It's sad to say, but this might not be over yet, and this prediction may continue to be proven correct. Number 2 on this list is famine. For probably most of the people watching this video, famine, or the thought of going hungry, most likely isn't that close to you. However, there are still millions of people in the world that suffer greatly from famine and die from it all the time. There will be great earthquakes and in various places famine and pestilences, and there will be terrors and great signs from heaven. Famine is mentioned a lot in the Bible, and I think it was probably a sign of the times. We have to remember that when the Bible was written, the world was not nearly as advanced as it is today. Food and water, basic resources for survival, were not a given by any means, but something that people had to fight for on the daily. If you had these resources in abundance, then that was considered a luxury and you were probably really wealthy. Even though we don't live in those times anymore, and now for a lot of people, water is at your nearest tap and food at your nearest supermarket, famine is still a real thing. It should also be noted that we should never take food for granted. Some experts are predicting that if global warming continues at the drastic rate that it's going, food will become far harder to grow and get a lot scarcer. Fingers crossed we can prevent this from happening and keep everybody well fed in the future. And finally, number 1 on this list is an asteroid. Listen to this passage from the Bible and tell me this isn't just a tad bit concerning. The first angel blew his trumpet, and there followed hail and fire mixed with blood, and these were thrown upon the earth. And 1/3 of the earth was burned up, and 1/3 of the trees were burned up, and all green grass was burned up. The second angel blew his trumpet, and something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea, and 1/3 of the sea became blood. 1/3 of the living creatures in the sea died, and 1/3 of the ships were destroyed. The third angel blew his trumpet, and a great star fell from heaven, blazing like a torch, and it fell on 1/3 of the rivers and on the springs of water. The name of the star is Wormwood. 1/3 of the waters became wormwood, and many people died from the water because it had been made bitter. So I don't know about you guys, but the prospect of getting hit with 3 separate asteroids really doesn't sound like a great time to me. The way that they describe it may be a bit tame too, to be honest. If we're gonna get hit with 3 separate things from space, then it's very likely that more than 1/3 of the trees are gonna burn up. In fact, it would probably be the end of the world as we know it. I've done a lot of research on the possibility of an asteroid coming and crashing into the Earth, and it's a real concern. Luckily, scientists don't predict anything in the near future, but that doesn't mean that it still won't happen. In fact, statistically speaking, eventually it will happen. Whether we're ready for this impact or are capable of defending ourselves from it, that's another question entirely.
Number 5. The Great Fire of London. The Great Fire of London was caused in 1666 after a bakery caught flame and spread rapidly throughout the city, engulfing the city in a storm of flame that lasted for a 3-day blaze, consuming just about everything in its path. The bakery was owned by Thomas Fariner, who went on record saying he was very, very, very sorry. It was the kind of freak accident that no one could have possibly seen coming, except of course if you were renowned predictor and possible psychic Michel de Nostradamus, who had this eerie prediction written down. Listen to this little quatrain. The blood of the just will commit a fault at London. Burnt through lightning of 23's the 6, the ancient lady will fall from her high place, several of the same sect will be killed. We really need to look into getting like an in-channel researcher and translator for Nostradamus, because instead of that, you just got me, a guy who passed high school English with a 51%, but I will do my level best for you. We can interpret 23's the 6 as an equation, reading 20 times 3 plus 6, which would give us 66. The Great Fire, of course, started in 1666 and burned for 3 days straight. Seems a little too convenient to just be a coincidence, right? Now the next question though, what is the ancient lady? The spirit of London itself? A way too early prediction about Queen Elizabeth? It's also a little bit off the mark with the quote about lightning, since it wasn't a lightning strike that started the Great Fire, but rather a bakery fire, unless you consider that Thomas Fariner's idea to open a bakery was a lightning in a bottle idea, but I'm gonna be honest, that's enough of a stretch, it's making my shoulders hurt. Now I'd like to try a little prediction of my own. I don't quite have the gift, but I've got a knack for this sort of thing. I'm having a vision. I see that the best scary content on the web is at top 5 scary videos, and if you like it, you should subscribe? I don't know what it means though. Number 4, the atomic bomb. Could Nostradamus have predicted humanity's darkest invention? Very possible. A quatrain seemingly references, impossibly, the bombings of the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki at the end of World War II. In his quatrain, Nostradamus wrote, Within 2 cities, there will be scourges the likes of which has never seen. Famine within plague. People put out by steel, crying to the great immortal God for relief. Hey, Nostradamus really was a cheery fella, wasn't he? Now, I like to think of myself as a bit of a skeptic. I took the online test and it said I'm 70% Scully and 30% Mulder. But even I've got to admit this one lines up pretty eerily. The 2 cities could very easily be referring to the 2 cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The scourges the likes of which is never seen, being about atomic weapons as a whole, the controversial nature of which goes without any further explanation. I mean, you can find about 1,000 quotes from just about everybody involved with the Manhattan Project, expressing their deep regret for what they did. The famine and plague could be referencing the radiation sickness and numerous other issues that arose following the immediate aftermath. As well, the line, "people put out by steel," could be an allusion to the man-made nature of the desolation, that it was constructed by man and delivered through an airplane and a concentrated team effort rather than any natural causes. It's worth bringing up that Nostradamus did have a personal first-hand experience treating plague victims, which does raise the possibility, of course, that he could be referring far more literally to 2 cities ravaged by literal plague, but it does beg just a little speculation as to why it lines up so well. Number 3. JFK. John F. Kennedy Jr. is probably one of the most famous and tragic presidents in American history, whose term was infamously cut short by an assassin. The ancient task will be completed from on high. Evil will fall on the great man. A dead innocent will be accused of the deed. The guilty on will remain in the mist. Okay, there is a lot to uncover and unpack here. Firstly, a dead innocent will be accused of the deed. Now, the official story is that Lee Harvey Oswald was the assassin of JFK, although 2 days after his arrest, he was fatally shot. He insisted that he was just a patsy to cover up the conspiracy, and despite the official evidence pointing towards Oswald as the culprit, public opinion polls in recent years have shown that the majority of Americans do not believe the official story and suspect that Oswald was a false flag, although we could be talking for absolutely hours if we go on about that tangent. Do some reading on this one at home. This is my favorite conspiracy theory of all time, and once you start reading about it, it is going to be all you are doing for the next week. There is so much to uncover, we could not possibly do it in 10 minutes. Continuing on the prophecy, the ancient task will be completed from on high. Evil will fall on the great man. In a very literal sense, this could be referring to the fact that JFK was shot from an elevated position, but there is also a widely recognized conspiracy theory that JFK was ordered to be assassinated by his own government, which could possibly be referring to from on high. If Lee Harvey Oswald really was a cover story, like he claims and conspiracists claim, then that would mean that the guilty on will remain in the mist, possibly referring to the mystery that's lingered on about the event as a whole for 60 years. It's very likely we will never uncover the real story or the truth behind what happened that day. Maybe Nostradamus knew, but he's not telling us much these days. Doesn't pick up his phone that often, doesn't answer my calls. Number 2, King Henry II. King Henry II was, well, you can probably guess, he was the King of France for a bit. He was the King of France from 1547 until his reign was tragically cut short bitterly in 1559. A tragedy that had befallen the people of France as he was slain in an accident during a tourney. Who could have predicted it, of course, except, oh, you know how this bit goes by now. Let's all say it on 3. 1, 2, 3. Nostradamus. Of course he did. It's the title of the video. Alright, let's hear what the quatrain said. The young lion will overcome the older one. He will pierce his eyes through a golden cage. The 2 wounds will ensure a cruel death on the field of combat in a single battle. I like that, like all of Nostradamus' prophecies, sounds like something that a wizard would tell you in a cave before giving you a sacred sword and telling you to embark on a quest to save the kingdom. Anyway, let's put on our little interpreting cap. King Henry was accidentally mortally injured when during a joust, splinters from the broken lance of his opponent, Gabriel de Lorge, was lodged inside King Henry's eye. From there, the king developed brain damage and sepsis, and would pass from his injury a few days later. Definitely sounds like the cruel death that Nostradamus had predicted in his little prophecy there. Now, it wasn't quite the field of combat though, instead occurring during what was supposed to be a game. What can I say? They just played harder than we do. It's all fun and games until someone loses an eye and then France no longer has a king and you have to retreat to your estate in Normandy in disgrace and live out the rest of your days as an exile. Did everybody else's mom always tell them that as a kid whenever they would go out to play? Nostradamus and King Henry II were actually personal friends, making this prediction just a little bit more tragic than usual. Nostradamus had referred to him as the invincible King Henry II, which is a bit ironic, sadly, since it turned out he was very vincible. Number 1. The French Revolution. Now, depending on where you lived in 17th century France, maybe you didn't think the French Revolution was actually that dark a thing. Maybe you thought it was great, actually. I did hear at one point there was some cake being passed around to everybody. Wouldn't know. Wasn't there. But I can tell you that Nostradamus did seem to predict the revolution almost exactly. Why don't you take yourself a little ear gander at this? From the enslaved people, songs, chants, and demands, the princes and lords are held captive in prisons. In the future, by such headless idiots, these will be taken as divine utterances. Before the war comes, the Great Wall will fall, the king will be executed, his death coming too soon will be lamented. The guards will swim in the blood. Near the river Seine, the soil will be bloodied. Hey, this one I almost don't even need that translator for. I feel like I can actually kind of understand this one, straight up. It sounds fairly plain and simple, and really just sounds like someone describing the French Revolution. The Great Wall falling could be referring to the storming of the Bastille prison, which was located near the Seine River, and was a site of criminal execution. This is where the guillotine was, and the beginning of the revolution. Could the guillotine be referring to literal headless idiots? The king will be executed? Well, that definitely happened. The only difference in Nostradamus' prediction is that he said it would be lamented. And while I'm sure the king's royal family was very upset, the people of France at the time seemed pretty excited to see him go. The soil being bloodied could be a dramatization or a metaphoric way of speaking to all the violence conducted in the name of the French Revolution. I've got to say, it's pretty strange how well Nostradamus was able to predict the French Revolution and as well the passing of King Henry II, but maybe he's got a home turf advantage for this sort of thing. You can just really focus in that hyperactive lens on anything involving France.
Number 5 on this list is the Great Flood. Johann Stauffer, a respected German mathematician and astrologer, predicted that a great flood would cover the world on February 25th, 1524, when all of the known planets would be in alignment under Pisces, a water sign. Hundreds of pamphlets announcing the coming flood were issued and set in motion a general panic. Count von Igelheim, a German nobleman, went so far as to build a 3-story ark. Though there was a light rain on the day of the predicted flood, no actual flooding materialized. So that was an entry from Britannica talking about world-ending scenarios that didn't pan out. Our man Johann definitely missed the mark on this one and was proven incorrect, but maybe he just got the dates wrong. Potentially, he was just 500 years too early. Fast forward 500 years to present day, and we are now on the verge of potentially a great flood again. The world is heating up and the ice caps are melting faster than they ever have. 1.2 trillion tons. That is how much ice is melting every single day, and the number continues to increase. Ever visited the island nation of Tuvalu? Well, if you haven't, then you'd better go soon, because before long it won't exist anymore. It's currently getting flooded by rising sea levels, and there's an evacuation in order to move all the citizens to New Zealand. This flooding won't just happen to Pacific Island nations either, but it's coming for all of us. Here's a map of North America if all the ice melted in the world. There are a lot of major cities on that map that are now totally underwater. This is going to happen worldwide, and we'll have millions, maybe even billions of people out of their homes with nowhere to live. The fallout would be absolutely catastrophic and could cause the end of the world. Number 4 on this list is a water shortage. So we actually just talked about how there might be too much water, but what about the total opposite of that? Not enough. Well, Baba Vanga is back once again to say that she believes 2022 is the year that the world deals with its most detrimental water shortages yet. When I say water shortages in this context, I'm not referring to ocean water, I'm referring to drinking water and the lack of it. Already there are many countries in the world that suffer from a lack of clean drinking water. Something that a lot of us take for granted these days is an everyday struggle for those living on the opposite side of the world. Sadly, Baba Vanga thinks it's only going to get worse. What does a lack of drinking water mean? Well, it means that a lot of people are going to die. Already millions die annually from a lack of drinking water, and that number will continue to rise if water goes out completely. Similar to a later entry that we're going to discuss, if there is truly a water shortage across the globe, then people are going to start fighting over it. Water will now become the new currency and everyone is going to want it. We can't just manufacture water out of thin air for billions of people, so those that have water will become extremely powerful. Humans need a few important things for overall survival. Air, water, and food are the three most important. Take out one of those three things and I could see a world-ending scenario arising very quickly. Number 3 on this list is the Malthusian theory. Now, I've actually talked about this theory before in a similar video, but I think I need to bring it up in this video as well. Malthusianism, as defined by Wikipedia, is the idea that population growth is potentially exponential, while the growth of the food supply or other resources is linear, which eventually reduces living standards to the point of triggering a population die-off. This theory was by Thomas Robert Malthus and was proposed several hundred years ago. If we think about it, then it does make a decent amount of sense. Eventually, there will simply be too many humans on the earth for us to grow food for all of those humans. Now, one thing Malthus didn't account for is human innovation, and the fact that we're constantly progressing technology. In fact, I think based on our current population, he would have believed this theory to have already taken hold, but due to human innovation and our advanced food growing technology, it hasn't. That being said, there's certainly still time. With the world population very close to touching 8 billion people and it's still rising, we're getting into dangerous territory when it comes to the Malthusian theory. Already, it's believed that close to 1 billion people suffer from serious famine every single day. The more people that we bring into this world, the more that number will rise. Soon, we could get to a place where food and the ability to grow food is so valuable that it almost turns into its own currency. This might not end the world immediately, but it could cause countries to start going to war over food with one another. Anarchy could fall upon the planet as humans grow hungry every single day. Here's to hoping that human innovation can stay ahead of the curve and keep everybody well fed. Number 2 on this list is painful, violent, and bloody business. Alright, so that's a bit of a weird title for an entry, but that's actually part of a quote from Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of Britain. In that quote, he's referencing Russia and their potential invasion of Ukraine. If you guys were unfamiliar, then right now there is a very real and very serious threat that the Russians attempt to invade Ukraine. This is because recently they mobilized roughly 100,000 of their troops and put them at various points across the border to Ukraine. Other world leaders have seen this and are accusing Russia of planning an invasion, but Putin adamantly denies it, basically saying that he can move his troops wherever he likes in his own country. This may be true, but the writing is on the walls. Everybody knows that Russia wants to own Ukraine and haven't acknowledged their claim of being an independent country, believing they are simply an extension of Russia. It was only a few years prior that we saw Russia annex the Crimean Peninsula, and it seems like now they're hungry for more. This time, it would be far bloodier though. Boris Johnson and Joe Biden have both come out and warned Russia against doing such an action. Biden has come out and said that such an attack would change the world. This in itself is a prophecy, and it isn't a good one. If Russia was to attack Ukraine, then the response from NATO would be swift and unforgiving. That means Russia is now fighting NATO, and if Russia is out here fighting NATO, you already know that other countries are going to get involved. China may want a piece of this action, and if I had to guess, they would probably take Russia's side, meaning that before we know it, we would end up in this massive conflict with some of the world's biggest powers. This is the closest that we've gotten to World War III in a long time. Painful, violent, and bloody business. These are the words that a world leader is using to describe what is to come if Russia invades Ukraine. A war involving the countries that I just said could escalate way too quickly and has serious world-ending or at least world-damaging potential. Fingers crossed everybody can chill the heck out and we don't need to go to war anytime soon. And finally, number 1 on this list is global warming. I really hate this one, guys. I truly hate how real this entry is, but it does need to be discussed. Our main man, Nostradamus, is back at it again with the predicts, and this time he really nailed it. Like the sun, the head will seal the shining sea. The live fish of the Black Sea will almost boil. That is part of a Nostradamus prediction discussing what is going to happen to our world and where the temperatures are headed. Basically, they aren't headed anywhere good. Here are a few scary stats from Earth.org. Within the next 2 2 decades, global temperatures are likely to rise 1.5 degrees Celsius. The last 7 years have been the warmest on record, and more than 1 million species are at risk of extinction by climate change. And guess what, friends? We are one of those 1 million species at risk. We've already talked about the potential of a great flood and all of that, but famine is going to become a major problem too. It's hard to grow crops on a good day, and try doing it when it gets way too hot. You can't. This is going to be devastating to some of the poor countries in the world and cause ripple effects that we don't even know about. I feel like I don't even really need to go down the rabbit hole of how bad global warming really is, because at this point we've most likely heard it all a million times over. I for one am pretty sick of hearing about it and would love for the world to collectively change their ways so that I no longer need to include such entries on lists like this. Let's just hope that we can figure it out and don't prove our guy Nostradamus, the prophet of doom, correct.
In at 5, Richard Parker. In May of 1884, a ship set sail from Southampton heading for Sydney, Australia. However, the ship never arrived. It sank, but some of the crew survived. They clung to life on the shipwreck, eating the remaining food they had before turning to other means in order to survive the deadly waters. They drew straws, determining which crew member was to be sacrificed in order for the others to feed. The short straw was drawn by cabin boy named Richard Parker, who was subsequently killed and eaten by the rest of the crew. In September of the same year, the ship was eventually found and rescued. Following this, the captain of the ship, Tom Dudley, and his crewmate, Edwin Stevens, were tried for the murder of Parker and were both found guilty. They were sentenced to death. However, this was overturned and they served just 6 months in jail. Now, it seems this entire incident was predicted by none other than Edgar Allan Poe in his one and only full-length novel, The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym, which was published in 1838. The novel is a first-person narrative following the character Pym, who recounts his journey on a whaling ship that became shipwrecked. And what exactly followed? Well, the crew were forced to resort to cannibalism, where once again a cabin boy drew the short straw. The name of the boy? Richard Parker. In at 4, Sharon Tate. On August 8, 1969, tragedy struck for the 26-year-old actress Sharon Tate, who was just 2 weeks away from giving birth to her first child with Roman Polanski. Tate had 3 friends over to her house, however, shortly after midnight they were all murdered by members of Charles Manson's cult. One body was found shot in his car, and Tate was found inside her home, strung by a rope with up to 16 stab wounds, 1 in her pregnant belly. Now, according to an article, Tate may have foresaw her own demise. In one interview with Dick Kleiner, Tate informed him of a strange vision she had had. The vision took place in 1967, at which point Tate was dating hairstylist Jay Sebring. She was sleeping in Sebring's house alone while he was out of town, which is when she reported experiencing a funny feeling. She reported seeing a small man in the bedroom with her. She said, I quote, "I saw something or someone tied to the staircase. Whoever it was, and I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman, but knew somehow that it was either Jay Sebring or me. He or she was cut open at the throat." Both Tate and Sebring were ultimately murdered on the night of August 6, 1969, Tate being strung up by a rope. In at 3, the Great Fire of London. From Sunday, September 2nd to Thursday, September 6th of 1666, the worst fire in London's history occurred, the Great Fire of London. It gutted the streets and homes of many, consuming 13,200 houses, 87 parish churches, and St. Paul's Cathedral. Now, the death toll has always been questionable, as there were only 6 reported deaths. However, it is likely this was a grave miscalculation, and that in fact many more deaths occurred from the blaze. Now, this deadly catastrophe was in fact predicted by Nostradamus in 1555 in his book Les Prophecies. In the chapter Century 2, the following 2 lines appear: "The blood of the just will be demanded of London, burnt by the fire in the year 66. It seems oddly accurate to just be a coincidence, don't you think? In at 2, Titanic. On April 14, 1912, the starboard side of the RMS Titanic struck an iceberg, creating a number of deadly holes below the waterline of the ship. Titanic began to sink, bow first, into the freezing cold waters of the North Atlantic. Now, all passengers should have survived, however the Ship of Dreams was ill prepared for such an event, and not enough lifeboats were available, leaving many passengers' fate left up to the waters below. 2 hours and 40 minutes after the initial crash, Titanic split in 2 and sank to the bottom of the Atlantic, taking 1,500 poor souls with it. Only 710 people survived, giving history one of the ocean's deadliest disasters. Jumping back to 1898, Morgan Robertson's novella was published titled Futility is centered on the ocean liner Titan as it hits an iceberg in the North Atlantic Ocean and quickly sinks. It's worth noting that in the novella, the Titan was described as unsinkable. Sound familiar? The crash of Titan occurs in the month of April, but not only that, but the majority of passengers aboard died due to the lack of lifeboats available. Creepy.